In this how-to, I'm going to show you how to create a manual cache. I'm going to use the Welsh Castle's first leg as an example, and I'll show you how to use Flightplan to help create the cache. So let's go into our options in Flight Simulator. We don't need our map at the moment. So under General Options, Data, down at the bottom you've got your rolling cache, and then you've also got a manual cache, which you can click the view button to open. Now, I don't have a manual cache on this machine yet, and I'll show you how to switch between manual caches, and I'll also show some tips and tricks that I've learned. We use manual caches for testing purposes, because if you're going to fly the same route over and over and over again, there's no point in burning through bandwidth loading the same scenery over and over. So if there's routes that you want to fly regularly and want to save some bandwidth, manual caches are a good idea. I don't know that manual caches really improve performance. I know they cut down on bandwidth usage substantially depending on where you are, but I will say that on some older video cards that we have, some, I believe they're AMD cards, Radeon maybe 570s or 580s, whatever that was, it seemed like they performed a little bit better when there was a cache file. So, you know, no guarantees. It's really not necessarily a performance enhancing thing. It's more just about saving your bandwidth. You might see slightly clearer imagery on certain cards, possibly. I can't guarantee that, but you know, subjectively, it seems like some of our older graphics cards, test machines, do a little better with a cache file. So let's create a cache file. I'm going to point out some tips and tricks that I've learned, some of which are going to seem silly, like this first one. I like to double click on the number so that it highlights the number before I enter a number. If you try and use backspace or delete in this field, it'll do weird stuff. If you just double click on the number, highlight the number, I've found that just by hitting the number and hitting enter seems to work every single time. It lights up your create cache button. If you start backspacing or trying to delete over numbers in that field, it seems to validate real time, and sometimes it'll shut off your create cache button. It's a 1 gig cache, just took a second to create. So now I've created a manual cache in my manual cache directory that I created ahead of time. And now we'll go ahead and cache some scenery. So now I said I wanted to cache the Welsh bush trip. So let's create kind of a little strip map here, and we'll switch to satellite mode so we can match world map. You can set your transparency, but what tends to happen is the imagery bleeds through and washes out the imagery in your cockpit map. But if you'd like, set your transparency. And then let's start at Gloucester Airport, and we'll need to find Gloucester Airport in world map. And it always starts you in Bourget, France. Like, I think it's the starting point of the France bush trip. And our Welsh castles, let's see, Gloucester is up here somewhere, I think. Let's zoom out. It's going to be up the river. Oh, it's way up here. I'm on the southern coast of England. So it's going to be up the river here. Let's go back to our point. And then we can start zooming in until the imagery is roughly, you know, until we have identifiable imagery that we can match up to the satellite imagery. And I know my push pin is right here. So here's a little dark spot that matches this dark spot. And there's a straight line that is usually a dead giveaway for a runway. So let's create our first region, and I'm going to name it Welsh Castles 1-1. So I'm going to say that's leg 1 of the Welsh Castles bush trip. So to me, this is the whole leg, and then -1 is going to be this first leg to the first waypoint, Pert and Ship Graveyard. So I'm going to create a different section probably every, 20-30 miles. You can check here. See, that's only 14 miles, but the point I want to make is you're going to probably want to keep your regions relatively small, and especially if you decide to do cities. If you want to cache Paris, you better take really small bites at it, or you're going to tie up your computer forever. This is a good thing to do at night before you go to bed. And then what you'll do is zoom in or out depending on what quality you want. So for high quality, the tightest resolution, I guess. You'll zoom in till you get high cache quality, zoom out more for medium, and you can get a wider range, and then high will give you a still wider range if you want to cache all of Wales practically. I usually just do the high quality because, I mean, to me, medium and low are not sucking up that much of my bandwidth to begin with. I could be kidding myself, but I think that's really how it works. Now, the other tip and trick portion that's going to sound kind of weird is put your target in the middle, and as you're zooming in, pay attention to where the pointer of your mouse is in the square, because as I'm zooming in, the pointer of my mouse is getting closer and closer to the edge of these two cells. So if I maybe switch to this side, I want to try and stay as close to the center of that cell as possible. Because what seems to happen is, and see, I'm still drifting to the left here. Maybe I should have gone this way. There we go. So now as I zoom in and out, my pointer is staying right in the center of that cell. Because what seems to happen is once your pointer crosses the border from one cell to the next, it doesn't increase your resolution, I guess. See how I can zoom in, and then if I zoom out and keep my pointer centered in the cell, it continues to give me larger and larger regions still in high cache quality. At some point it's going to switch to medium, but I think you'll find that as soon as you cross over a border, it switches you to medium without giving you the widest possible range. I think you're getting the same resolution imagery saved, but making sure you've got the smallest possible grid squares gives you the maximum possible region you can select per screen. Okay, so that was really the point I was trying to make, is if I center my waypoint in my screen, I can just grab the entire screen rather than trying to fool around selecting particular landmarks. They're small groups of individual squares. Really, probably the most efficient way to do this is just maybe do a high quality cache at your waypoints, and then maybe just use medium to get to the next waypoint on your path, which for us would be the Perton Ship Graveyard right down here. So you can see a medium cache would cover this entire region, and then I could zoom back in to the Perton Ship Graveyard itself and get another high definition, we'll call it, cache here. Okay, so boom, boom. I've now got the Perton Ship Graveyard cached. And I've got, here we'll zoom out to match the zoom level a little bit. And there's our Gloucester Airport to Perton Ship Graveyard. Now, maybe I just want a high quality cache for the entire flight path. What I would typically do is just sort of line up where your flight path is against whatever whatever available landmarks you've got. We're going to need to zoom in a little bit more in our Google map to find, okay, so this is right across our flight path. So we're actually farther south of our flight path than we need to be. So something like this puts the line of my flight path right across kind of the middle of my screen. So again, I can just pick from the top corner, go to the bottom corner, and I'll get a nice rectangular section. Do it again. Okay, so our flight path actually goes right past the tip of the river here. Need to be more like here to center our flight path. And then select that. And then here I'm already at my end region, so I'm just gonna sort of splice them together, I guess. If you try and release your section, I guess I haven't been pointing it out. Does it tell us somewhere? Yeah, it tells us here. Your brush mode is shift, and to remove is control, and then to paint is my right click. So I right click and drag. Now, if I release over one of these toolbars, it's not going to give me my region. That's kind of why I like to go corner to corner. That way you don't mess around having to work around stuff. I didn't go far enough. One more row, and then this little corner. If you go off the screen, it won't register either. You want to be in that last little square. Okay, and now that's the entire flight path between Gloucester Airport and the Perton Ships Graveyard. So now I can keep going, but you're going to want to take small bites at this. So you're going to want to click finish and download, and it's going to download the photogrammetry and the elevation data, I believe. I know it's going to download the elevation data. I believe it downloads the photogrammetry as well. Now, as I mentioned before, if you're going to do heavily photographed areas, cities, or even possibly areas with a lot of elevation changes, you know, potentially in the mountains or canyons somewhere, you're going to want to take small bites. So you'll notice my Welsh Castles 1-1 was just a, what did we say? It's a 14-mile stretch. And this is going to take some time. Eventually, it'll start registering your percentage complete. And one thing not to trust is the estimated until it's gotten up to 10 or 15% at least, because this number will continue to increase for a while before it levels out. But it, you know, once it's past about 50%, it's pretty accurate. Be prepared to be patient. Again, I just grabbed a little small section. So here we are. It's looking like, you know, about 6.5 minutes for 7 miles. So if you're going to do cache files, especially if you're going to do a large one, or you're going to do a densely populated area, or again, an area where you expect there's a lot of photogrammetry, you may want to just start this at night and go to bed and let it run, because it can take a very, very long time. So when it's finished, it frees up your computer, it changes the sections that you've cached to white, and you can pick up with the next section. And carry on from where we left off. Where are we going? Oh, out across to this little spot. So we may just be able to find that. Yeah, so there's sort of a U-shaped forest, which looks to be this right here. Our waypoint is what? St. Bravel's Castle, which I doubt we're going to find on the imagery here. Well, maybe. So it's in the corner of town here. Is that right? No, it's actually not. I've got the push pin in the wrong spot. Push pin should be over here. Back up a little bit here. There should be a little loop in the road. So here's our road, here's our loop. So this would be St. Bravel's. So again, I like to try and get my target centered and then zoom back out and try and keep my mouse as centered as I can in that cell to try and get the maximum number of cells on the screen here. I think if I go farther, it's going to switch to medium. We'll try one more. Yeah, see, it switches to medium. Okay, so that's for St. Bravel's Castle, and it's essentially right next to where we already were, so we'll just tie it in here and finish and download. And then from there you just carry on until you've completed. Now, one thing you're going to want to be careful of, and I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule for this that I can give you, but for our test systems, when we do cache files, we try and keep them under 100 miles. It seems like no matter how remote the place might be in terms of not increasing the size of your cache file. I guess we'll talk about the size of cache files too in a minute, but there seems to be a total number of cells that you can cache, no matter how many meg that takes up. It seems like you'll eventually hit a limit where it'll just crash and it won't let you finish that particular cache. The reason I say to cache small portions at a time, take small chunks, because at some point it's not going to let you go any farther, no matter what size the cache is or how small the file might be. It's just not going to let you go any farther. The other thing that can happen is as it's caching the region, it might come up with a red message up here telling you that that, you need to increase your cache size. So basically what you'll do is go back to your cache setting. Well, we'll let this finish and then I'll show you. Okay, so now that that's finished, in the interest of time, I'm not going to continue caching regions until I fill up my 1 gig. Now, these amounts you see here do not match up to 1 total gig worth of cached regions. I presume it needs some elbow room inside the file, and I'll show you why I assume that too. But just be advised, you can't really gauge how close you are to running out of space based on these numbers here, but at some point it's going to tell you that you've got to increase your cache size. So again, like I said at the beginning, you're going to want to double click so that it highlights the number, enter a new number, and click modify cache. Or actually enter your new number, hit enter on the keyboard, and then click modify cache, because this field is really squirrely. Okay, but I don't need to increase this cache size. So what I'm going to do is switch to another cache directory altogether, so I can create a new cache file, 1 gig, hit enter, create cache, and now I've got another blank cache file. Okay, now what I can do is let me just go into Explorer here. Here's our rolling cache. Here's the manual cache we just created. And now I've said I'm going to create another cache here in the cache 1 directory. So now that frees up this cache file. I can move it, I can copy it, whatever I want to do. But what I want to show you is you can zip these up, and even though you've allocated 1 gig of space inside of that cache file, and that cache file said it had, I don't know, 16, it had like 30 meg, I don't remember, but it had some smaller amount shown in the cache file. What I can do is name this something different. Even though it's a 1 gig file based on how it was cached, it's really only a 47 meg file. So, I mean, you can literally keep these on a thumb drive if you want, once you've zipped them up. Now, if there's a lot of photogrammetry in there, it's not going to zip up much. This tells me that this is probably mostly all elevation data, but if there's some large photogrammetry in there, it'll burn through that space pretty quick, and you'll end up having to increase your cache size potentially several times. But what this allows me to do is then I can delete that cache file and create a whole different one. So if I go back to our original cache directory, which was here actually, our manual directory, it's empty again. Create a brand new cache file, maybe pick the next leg of my flight plan, open a new flight file for the next leg, and then I could create a cache file for my second leg. So, cache new region, give it a different set of names, or use the same names, it doesn't really matter. I don't even remember what I did, but this would be leg 2, segment 1, or something like that. And then you'd find your region, which this one would be starting in Cardiff, which I think is down here somewhere. I think here's Cardiff, I believe. And then I could start caching from here. And then when I want to switch between my legs, let's just do Cardiff. Oh, so Cardiff is farther down the coast, and here's our Cardiff airport. So, if we wanted to cache the airport, and now we have Cardiff airport. Now I intentionally avoided Cardiff itself because there's several points of interest, so I'm going to assume that file is going to start getting large and take longer. But for the purposes of my example, we can assume I cache the entire leg for the second leg of the Welsh Castles series. So now if I switch back into my other directory, this is my blank file I haven't used yet, which will free up this file that I just created to go ahead and zip it up. And this one would have ended up being Welsh Castles 2. And then if you want to get fancy, we have a share on the network, but you can keep a library folder somewhere and just put your compressed files in there, which are tiny. And then when you want to fly them, you just pick the one you want to fly. Here, let's do it this way so you can see what I'm doing. Let's say I want to fly my Welsh Castles 1 trip. I can take this manual cache, drop it into the manual cache directory, go back into Flight Simulator. If I was coming in from the main menu, I would go to Options, General Options, Data. At the bottom, Manual Cache, View, select my manual cache directory, and it loads Welsh Castles 1. I can load that up in Flightplan, load it up in World Map, and I'm ready to fly. Then when I finish my leg in World Map, well, it's nighttime in Wales right now, but once I finish my flight and I'm ready to fly the next leg, before I load that leg in World Map, I want to go back to the main menu, Options, General Options, Data, View, and then this time, and we'll open this one. So we go back. So let's say I'm going to do my Welsh Castles 2, drag it in here. Yes, please, go ahead and replace it. Now, it won't let you replace your active manual cache. So if you start getting confused about your directories, don't worry about it. If you copy a manual cache file over an active manual cache, Windows will tell you that it's in use. But now when we switch our directory to cache 1 here, now I've got my Welsh Castles 2 leg. These are essentially 2 GB worth of cache files that I've now compressed. So I'm using up 58 MB on disk for 2 GB worth of files. Now again, if I go ahead and cache Berlin and it takes me 15 gig to cache Berlin, that file's probably not going to zip down very much. It might zip down to 14 gig or something like that. But if you have low bandwidth, if you live in a rural area and you just can't get faster bandwidth, it might be worth it to go ahead and download that cache file. I mean, disk space is relatively cheap. You can, again, store these on USB thumb drives, external drives, wherever you want to store them. And then as you get tired of them, you can delete them. So that's swapping between manual cache files. I guess the last point to make here is use cache files at your own risk. They do get corrupted. They do crash Microsoft Flight Simulator from time to time, regardless of whether you've used manual caches or not. If Microsoft Flight Simulator is crashing on startup, first thing you want to do is delete your manual cache, delete your rolling cache, and recreate a new one. We have seen where zipping and unzipping these, eventually sometimes the caches will get corrupted, but I don't know that it really has anything to do with zipping and unzipping them. I think it really may have to do with when Flight Simulator itself reads and updates the manual cache. It seems to update it every time you open it. It says updating manual cache, which I presume to mean that it's checking the regions that you have cached to see if there have been changes, but I don't know that that's true or not. That's just been the assumption we've been working off of. That's all I've got. There's no Flightplan to download. Flightplan doesn't allow you to upload manual cache files, but this Flightplan is available to fly, as is the entire Welsh Castle series at simflightplan.com/download. If you go simflightplan.com/series/Welsh-Castles, that'll get you the whole series, but you can go to the downloads page and just search Welsh Castles. It'll bring them all up. But that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching. I hope this helps. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe.